Hi, it's me again, and it's you again. I'm Alfonso Muchacho, and I'm back to answer your questions. We live in tough times, folks, but tough times make tough people, right? So, with that in mind, I'm here to answer some questions. You sent your questions in, I'm going to answer them. Question number 1. Do you spend more time at home or in the studio? Well, luckily for me, I have the studio in my home, so I don't need to go outside. I always wanted a big studio somewhere else that wasn't in my house, and then I realised I'd have to travel there and it'd be a pain in the backside. And also, now we can't leave our homes, it's quite convenient already being here. Day or night or both for producing music? I think both. Any spare time is a good time to be producing music. I don't wait until it gets dark or anything like that. I just do it. My preference, I guess, is I think you feel more creative at night, but more productive in the day, as in I'll do more boring things, like all the boring admin and stuff like that you've got to do with like running a record label and sending tracks to labels, all that kind of stuff. But definitely I think you come up with better ideas at night. Who knows? How do you make tracks that sound so loud in mastering, not lots of compression, ? That comes down to a very boring answer. It comes down to the mix and producing as you go. And by that I mean I compress in stages. So I'll compress the initial track, the sound in the track, and then I usually group a lot of my elements. So I'll have all the melodies grouped into a group in Ableton, and then I'll compress at that stage as well, just knocking off like 1 or 2 dB. And then by the time I actually get the track to the mastering stage, everything's reasonably loud anyway, so I don't have to hammer the track with a limiter by 7 dB, anything like that. So compressing in stages, number 1. Number 2, I think a way to make your track stand out and make it sound louder without it actually being louder is to use saturation, be that overdrive, distortion, whatever you want to call it. If you've got a track and an element isn't popping out, let's say the mid-range is a bit dull, if you stick a saturation plug-in, maybe a little bit of overdrive on that, it can make it spring to life and come out of the track. You don't actually have to make it any louder, it's just it gives the perception of it being louder. I think it's a very underused trick thing. Tips for committing to projects and not starting something new. I never really have a problem with this. I think the way I look at it is the right tracks will get finished, and maybe I have a different view to other people, but if you're finding that you don't want to work on a track and you want to start something new instead, maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe that track wasn't very good, and maybe that's why you want to start on a new track. If that's the case, why don't you just leave the track for maybe a couple of weeks and come back to it? And then if it sounds good and you're surprised by how good it sounds, you don't remember it sounding that good, then go ahead and finish it. But most of the time, if I'm not feeling it and I just leave it, I've got probably 3 million abandoned projects in Ableton, and they can stay abandoned because I finish the right tracks and I don't finish the wrong tracks, if that makes sense. Of course it makes sense. Is it easy to start using synths and drum machines as opposed to plugins and sample packs, or would it be too overwhelming? Super simple really. It's not too overwhelming at all, just buy one at a time. The wrong thing to do would be to go out and buy 5 synths and 2 drum machines, and then you try and wire it all up and your head explodes and you'll just end up not learning your instruments as well. So I would buy one at a time. One thing to bear in mind, and a lot of people fall into this trap when they buy, let's say, their first analog synth, is they can sound very dry, and by that I mean they don't really have any effects on them. So you'll be used to going through your plugins, and obviously when you're going through a plugin, you go through all the presets, and all the presets are designed to sound great, so they're absolutely drenched in reverb and delay, and so you're used to that sound. And then when you get your first analog synth and you hit the key, it's bzz, 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 and you're like, well, that doesn't sound very good at all. So bear that in mind. Make sure you're sending your analog synths to effects either in your DAW or just buy some cheap guitar pedals and then run the synths through them just to give them a bit more life, because it can sound very dull on their own, unprocessed. Next up, how do you know when it's time to give your ears a rest? Well, your ears will tell you. I think your ears and you it's helpful thinking about them as 2 separate entities. If you're getting bored and you feel tired, then take a rest. Your ears, I had a problem where I basically stayed up for 2 or 3 days producing music, and then by the end of it, it hurt to listen to music, physically hurt my ears to listen to any music. So I obviously finished for that day and I thought I'd come back later. The next day it was still a problem. I couldn't listen to any music. I could just about watch TV with the volume down really low, but I was really worried for a long time. I think it took like 2 or 3 days for the pain to go away, and it was super frustrating because I had like mixes to record, and I was doing loads of other stuff, and I had all this time set aside to finish this, and it just, my ears told me, no, you've had enough, you've been listening to too much crap progressive house. So, next question. Kick and bass integration. How is this done? Question mark. So, I think this comes down to choosing the right sounds in the first instance. I don't think it's so much about processing, and by that I mean EQ and compression. I think it's more about getting your levels right. Obviously, it can help to find the peak of your kick, where that sits in the frequency spectrum, and then maybe dip that slightly in your bass line to allow the kick to come through. People talk about using sidechain compression, which it can sound good as long as you don't overdo it. But I find if you're using a lot of side chaining and you're having to duck the bass line, like, so it's pumping, I think you're basically using the wrong sounds. So I think it all comes down to sound selection, and I like the kick and the bass to kind of hit at the same level, so that they both kind of sound the same. So if you put a limiter across them both, the kick and the bass will be hitting at about the same amount, so you'd see the same amount of gain reduction on the limiter. That's how I like to do it. But that's for my kind of music. It can be very different if you're making deep house as opposed to like drum and bass. It's obviously going to be very different. But yeah, I think it's all down to sound selection and getting your levels right. I think that's more important than the actual processing. Next up, favourite wine, question mark. Too many to choose from. I don't know what my favourite wine is, but my favourite varieties are Chianti Classico and red Zinfandels, which are really strong wines. I like my wines big and bold, kind of like myself. What's your favourite DAW? That is Ableton Live. It's my one true love. Well, that and red wine as well. Actually, I'm getting more into white wine. Sorry to be talking about wine, but it's more important, isn't it? I'm getting into white wine now. We're coming into the summer season. I'm going to go outside with a Riesling today, sit in the garden and think about my future. Any more questions? Drop them down below and I'll see if I can answer. Stay safe, stay seen, increase the peace, heal the world.